The courtroom buzzed with the quiet chaos of early morning proceedings, papers shuffling, muted coughs, hushed side conversations. The wooden benches groaned beneath the weight of a dozen anxious people waiting to have their fines reduced or their tickets dismissed. Some held envelopes of paperwork clutched to their chests like armor. Others just looked tired, beat down, used to being ignored. At precisely 9:02 a.m., Kendrick Robinson stepped through the heavy doors of the Greenville Municipal Courthouse. He moved with the kind of calm purpose that came from years in federal courts, long days spent on human trafficking trials, gang takedowns, and civil rights investigations. But today, he was walking into something much smaller. Municipal. Routine. A property tax adjustment on his late grandmother's home. He wore a dark navy suit, crisp and clean, but not flashy. His shoes, polished. His briefcase, old but sturdy. And still, as he made his way quietly to the defense bench, the glances started. A bailiff's eyes lingered just a bit longer than necessary. The woman 2 rows back clutched her purse tighter. The receptionist near the front raised an eyebrow as if to say, "Are you in the right room?" Kendrick didn't respond. He'd felt this before. In airports. Restaurants. Elevators. But he had more important things on his mind today. The case was simple, at least on paper. His grandmother's home, a small one-storied brick house with fading shutters and a front porch swing, had recently been slapped with a 30% property tax increase. No renovation. No sale. No notice. Just a new assessment, and a demand for nearly $2,000 more in annual taxes. For Kendrick, it wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. That house had history. His grandmother had worked nights as a nurse, packed lunches in foil, paid off the mortgage $50 at a time. She raised Kendrick there. Read to him every night from a Bible that smelled like lavender. That house was sacred ground. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. The courtroom stood as Judge Alan Drayton entered. White hair slicked back, robe pressed to perfection, expression carved in granite. A former prosecutor with a reputation for being strict but fair, though Kendrick knew that strict rarely fell evenly across skin tones. "Mr. Robinson," Judge Drayton said, glancing down at his docket. "You're late." Kendrick stood calmly. "Yes, Your Honor. I apologize. I was. You were supposed to be here at 8:50, the judge cut him off, already irritated. "This court runs on time. Not your personal schedule." Kendrick's voice was even, but firm. "Your Honor, I had an urgent matter with the U.S. Attorney's Office. A federal case involving human trafficking." "That's not this court's concern," the judge snapped, now looking at Kendrick like a school principal dealing with a troublemaker. "You're here now. But your tardiness disrupts proceedings." Kendrick tilted his head slightly, surprised. "Respectfully, Your Honor, I was only a few minutes." "Enough," Judge Drayton said, gavel raised. "Contempt of court, $750 fine." A hush fell over the room. The kind that doesn't just silence, it suffocates. Kendrick blinked once, not out of shock, but calculation. He slowly sat back down, his jaw locked, his hand tightening around the edge of his briefcase. He wasn't the only one late that morning. Not by far. 10 minutes earlier, a white man in a wrinkled blazer had rushed in, breathing hard, muttering about traffic. The judge hadn't even looked up. 5 minutes before Kendrick, a young white woman in yoga pants had slipped in apologetically and was simply waved through. No contempt. No lecture. No fine. Just Kendrick. $750. The judge moved on to the next case like it never happened. But Kendrick couldn't. Not now. He opened his briefcase, not to grab the folder marked tax appeal, but to reach underneath it. Beneath the papers was his federal badge. Assistant U.S. Attorney, Northern District of South Carolina. Gold crest. Leather case. Authority earned the hard way. He didn't take it out. Not yet. But he looked at it for a long moment. This isn't just about Grandma's house anymore. Kendrick sat motionless in his seat as the judge moved briskly through the next name on the docket. To anyone else in the room, he looked calm, composed, detached even. But his mind had narrowed to a sharp point, focused not on the tax appeal he came here for, but on the unmistakable line the judge had just drawn through him. He had arrived only a few minutes late. Not ideal, yes, but certainly not criminal. And yet, he was the only person to be reprimanded. The only one fined. The only one silenced mid-sentence. Contempt of court. $750. A fine larger than most people's rent. It wasn't the money. It was the principle. The assumption. The casual, unchecked power that had descended on him the moment he stood and introduced himself. He could still hear his grandmother's voice, gentle but firm, from years ago. Baby, it ain't always what they say that tells you what they mean, it's how quick they're ready to shut you up. Kendrick took a slow breath and scanned the courtroom. People avoided looking at him directly now, unsure of what to make of what had just happened. Some looked confused. Others nodded in solidarity. And in the far corner, a young black man in a hoodie tapped something into his phone, his eyebrows furrowed. Drayton's bench wasn't a bench anymore, it was a stage. And Kendrick, whether he had asked for it or not, had just become the center of something bigger than a tax dispute. The court moved forward, names called, motions heard. But Kendrick's mind wasn't in this courtroom anymore. It was in Washington, D.C., where he'd once stood in front of a Senate subcommittee and laid out a case against a crooked mayor who had funneled federal education funds into shell companies. It was in Baltimore, where he'd stood beside parents who had lost children to gang violence and told them he would fight like hell to make sure their stories were heard. And it was back in Charleston, on a porch where his grandmother had told him, in a voice worn from night shifts, "You speak up, no matter what suit they got on. The robe don't make him right." He hadn't planned to flash his badge today. Hadn't wanted to pull rank or play cards. But sometimes, rank wasn't about status, it was about accountability. When Judge Drayton finally called Kendrick's name again for the property case, the courtroom felt different. Not louder, but heavier. Everyone knew something had shifted. Kendrick rose slowly, buttoned his suit jacket, and approached the podium without a single piece of paper in hand. He left the tax documents in his briefcase. He didn't need them for what came next. He placed a small leather wallet gently on the podium, opened it, and turned it so the golden badge gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights. "Your Honor," Kendrick began, his voice quiet but commanding, "I believe it's important that we both understand who's speaking before we proceed." Judge Drayton leaned forward, squinting slightly, then froze. On the bench before him was the official seal of the United States Department of Justice. Below it, engraved in clean black lettering, were the words, Kendrick A. Robinson, Assistant U.S. Attorney, Civil Rights Division. A pause fell over the courtroom. One so deep you could hear the clock ticking above the exit sign. The judge's face, once stern and inflexible, registered something new, uncertainty. Maybe even fear. Kendrick continued, "I didn't plan to identify myself this morning. I came as a private citizen, representing a claim involving my late grandmother's home. But the events of this morning demand clarity." He turned slightly, addressing not just the judge now, but the entire courtroom. This courtroom, like all courtrooms, is a place where the scales of justice are meant to balance evenly, regardless of color, clothing, or position. But what I experienced today wasn't balance. He paused. I was fined $750 for being 2 minutes late. Others who arrived after me, who interrupted proceedings, who showed blatant disregard for decorum, were not fined, not reprimanded, not even acknowledged. The difference, it seems, was not our actions. It was who we were. Or who we looked like. A soft murmur rose in the gallery. Kendrick didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "This court may not fall under my jurisdiction," he said, turning back to the bench, "but I serve the Department of Justice. And the DOJ is very interested in patterns, especially those involving unequal treatment in public institutions." Judge Drayton shifted in his seat, lips parting, but he didn't speak. "I've documented today's proceedings," Kendrick said, lifting a small notepad. "And I've already contacted my assistant to begin a review of comparable case transcripts over the last 5 years." Drayton finally found his voice, though it came out thinner than before. "Mr. Robinson, this is highly irregular." "What's irregular," Kendrick cut in, "is punishing citizens based on appearance and calling it order." No one moved. No one spoke. No one looked away. Judge Drayton leaned back, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. For a man used to total control of the room, the silence now felt like betrayal. There were no allies in sight. Kendrick slowly retrieved his badge and folded it away. "I will proceed with my appeal as originally filed," he said, "but I'm also submitting a formal complaint to the Judicial Review Commission. Not for my sake, but for every voice you've silenced because they didn't have this," he tapped the spot where his badge had been, "to make you listen." It started with a post. The young man in the back corner of the courtroom, a law student named Malik Simmons, had written a few lines during the hearing, barely thinking much of it. But when Kendrick Robinson laid his federal badge on the podium and calmly exposed the judge's double standards in front of a packed room, Malik knew this wasn't just another local injustice. It was a moment. One that needed to be seen. His caption read, "Black man fined $750 for being 2 minutes late. Others? Nothing." Then he pulls out his badge. He's a federal prosecutor. Whole courtroom went silent. Judge looked shook. "We're not imagining this stuff. #Equal Justice now." He posted it to Twitter with a short video clip he had secretly recorded once Kendrick began speaking. Within an hour, it was being shared across South Carolina. By that evening, it had crossed state lines. Back in his Charleston office, Kendrick sat in a high-backed chair behind a desk covered in files from 3 other federal investigations. Normally, he would have stayed quiet. Normally, he would have let the system speak through paperwork, not headlines. But this wasn't a normal situation. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since he stepped out of court that afternoon. Reporters. Colleagues. Law students. Even a local judge from Columbia texted, "I heard what happened. If you're building something, I want in." His assistant, Danielle, stepped into his office, holding a printout. "Malik Simmons," she said, placing the paper on his desk. First-year law student at Claflin. Pre-law Twitter blew up because of him. His video passed 500,000 views in 6 hours. Kendrick raised his eyebrows. Danielle continued. "We're trending under #bias in the bench. And now, journalists are digging into Drayton's docket." He leaned back, silent. "Do we move forward?" she asked. Kendrick tapped his pen against the desk. "I didn't plan this," he said. "No," Danielle replied. "But maybe this was the plan." That evening, Kendrick opened a private file on his encrypted DOJ account. It was titled, "Drayton Pattern, Initial Notes." Inside, he had already logged 5 names from earlier that morning, citizens who had entered the courtroom late, spoken out of turn, or been disruptive, all white. None fined. None silenced. He started building a list. Over the next few days, Danielle pulled every public case heard in Drayton's courtroom for the past 2 years. They ran keyword analyses. Compared sentencing patterns. Reviewed who had been cited for contempt. Who had received payment plan options. Who had not. A pattern emerged. Not once had a white defendant been fined more than $100 for a late appearance or minor courtroom disruption. Black defendants, however, had received steep fines over 20 times. And nearly every one of them had been cited for contempt. Kendrick sat back, staring at the numbers. They weren't just damning. They were undeniable. The local news stations picked up the story next. Then regional media. Then a national civil rights blog ran a headline. Federal prosecutor silenced in courtroom, racism wearing robes? By day 5, Kendrick's inbox was overflowing. A retired black judge from Georgia emailed, saying, "I've seen this too many times to count. But thank you for standing when so many of us couldn't." Students from 3 different HBCU law schools organized a live-stream panel to dissect the implications. Civil rights attorneys called for the judge's suspension. But Kendrick stayed quiet. Not because he was afraid, but because he knew what came next had to be meticulous. The court of public opinion was roaring, but if he wanted lasting change, he needed to operate from inside the system and expose it with precision. Kendrick couldn't sleep the night it all broke nationally. He lay on his back staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead. He remembered his first semester in law school, being the only black student in a constitutional law seminar. The professor had asked him, flatly, in front of the room, "Do you believe racism still plays a significant role in court decisions?" He'd said yes. The professor smirked. "Where's your evidence?" Kendrick didn't have it then. But he did now. On the 7th day, Kendrick received a call from his direct supervisor at the U.S. Attorney's Office. "It's happening," she said. "What is?" Kendrick asked. "The Judicial Review Commission has quietly opened a formal inquiry into Judge Drayton. They've asked for all records, transcripts, and supporting materials tied to your courtroom appearance and his conduct over the last 5 years." "And media?" Kendrick asked. "Already knocking. But more importantly, DOJ is watching. Your name's on the desk of a deputy AG. They're calling this a potential national test case for bias in the judiciary." Kendrick didn't speak for a moment. Then, "Good. Let's give them a case they can't ignore." He closed his laptop and looked at the folder on his desk. The one marked, "When the system is the crime." The quiet didn't last. By the start of the second week, Kendrick had been summoned to Columbia for a closed-door meeting with the Judicial Review Commission. It was a sterile, glass-paneled room with polished chairs, chilled water bottles, and people who didn't blink. Across the table sat 3 commissioners, all veterans of the system, 2 former state justices and 1 federal compliance officer. They were cordial but cold. Serious. Kendrick handed over a folder. Inside, spreadsheets, transcripts, timestamps. Names, cases, outcomes. Every ruling Judge Alan Drayton had issued over the last 5 years, color-coded by race, income status, and case type. The pattern was there, in plain view. Black defendants received harsher fines in 71% of identical infraction cases, Kendrick explained. Contempt citations were 4.5 times more likely. And payment plans were disproportionately denied based on race. One commissioner, a tall man with silver hair and a cufflink habit, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mr. Robinson," he said, "you're building a compelling statistical argument, but proving intent." "I don't need to prove what's in his heart," Kendrick interrupted. "Just what came from his bench." Silence. Then the woman to the right leaned forward, lacing her fingers. "We'll open formal proceedings within the week," she said. "But know this, Drayton has powerful friends. This won't be clean." Kendrick nodded once. Justice rarely is. By Friday, the backlash had begun. The Greenville City Council released a carefully worded statement defending Judge Drayton's long-standing commitment to law and order. A letter, allegedly signed by several courthouse clerks, claimed Kendrick was misinterpreting courtroom discipline as bias. The local news ran the headline, "Crusader or Careerist? Controversy swirls around U.S. Attorney." But Kendrick didn't blink. Instead, he doubled down. He held a private roundtable with local civil rights attorneys, public defenders, and law professors. Inside the room were decades of first-hand accounts, stories of defendants who were humiliated, silenced, or crushed under the weight of routine rulings. A public defender shared through tears, "I've seen Judge Drayton scold a single mother for asking for more time to pay a fine, while letting a white business owner off with a laugh for the same thing." Another attorney whispered, "We all knew. But no one wanted to be the one." Kendrick looked around the table. Well, now someone is. That night, Kendrick sat alone in his apartment, the city lights blinking faintly outside the window. He poured a glass of water, then placed his grandmother's framed photo beside his laptop. She stood in that old porch swing, hand on her hip, smiling like she knew something the world didn't. He thought of how she'd sat through his bar exam failure the first time, how she made him call her the second he passed it the next year. "If they don't give you the door," she'd said, "you kick it down. Just don't lose your soul doing it." The door was open now. But the soul? That part was trickier. He wasn't just investigating a judge anymore. He was confronting a system that protected itself. And every step forward meant a new enemy. 3 weeks later, Kendrick was called to D.C. He didn't expect much. Maybe a courtesy sit-down. A PR gesture. But instead, he found himself in a conference room at DOJ headquarters, sitting across from Deputy Attorney General Carla Monroe, a sharp-eyed woman known for tearing apart police departments with systemic bias records. "We've been watching," she said. "Your case against Drayton? It's airtight." Kendrick waited, arms folded. "But this isn't just about one judge," she continued. "The question is, do you want to stop with him, or open the floodgates?" Kendrick met her eyes. "You're saying there are others?" She slid a folder across the table. Inside were dozens of complaints, state judges from across the country. Most ignored. Some buried. "We can deputize you under a special review panel," she said. "You'd work with civil rights, internal audit, and policy. It won't be clean. It won't be quiet. But it will matter." Kendrick stared at the folder. A new storm. A bigger fight. He exhaled. "When do we start?" Back in Greenville, the courtroom was packed for what was supposed to be a routine session. But then Judge Drayton entered through a side door, adjusted his robe, and addressed the court before taking the bench. "This court is aware of the rumors, accusations, and media spectacle surrounding my conduct," he began, voice louder than usual. "I want to make something clear, this is my courtroom. And I don't answer to public opinion. I answer to the law." He glared toward the back row. Straight at Kendrick, seated in civilian clothes again. "For those who came here expecting a spectacle, you're in the wrong place." He paused, gavel raised. "But for those ready to play games, let's play." Judge Drayton had always run his courtroom like a fortress. Unflinching. Cold. Final. But this time, it felt more like a glass house, with every eye in the room ready to watch it shatter. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Reporters lined the back wall, their badges flashing beneath courtroom lighting. A local news station had requested footage, the judge denied it. So, they sent sketch artists instead. And at the front row, notepad in hand, sat Kendrick Robinson. Not in his DOJ suit. Not with his badge on display. But in a simple gray button-down, watching. Waiting. Not for revenge. For truth. The first case of the day was a citation appeal, a young man ticketed for expired plates. Nothing unusual. But the judge, visibly rattled, rushed the proceeding and granted a full dismissal without question. The second case was similar. A woman who had missed a payment deadline by 3 days. No scolding. No fine. Just a nod and you're free to go. By the third case, even the bailiff looked confused. Judge Drayton was soft. Almost performative. Like he knew every word was being weighed. Kendrick tapped his pen against the notepad softly. They always change when the lights come on, he thought. But one fair hearing didn't erase years of damage. He flipped to the next page in his file. Highlighted in yellow were the most egregious disparities, same infractions, different punishments. Same courtroom, different realities. Today wasn't just about showing the contrast. Today was about forcing the court to see it too. Halfway through the docket, the courtroom shifted. A new case was called. Darius Caldwell, a black teenager facing a $500 fine for willful disruption during a city protest. It was his first offense. No priors. A straight-A student who had held a cardboard sign at a peaceful rally. The moment his name was announced, Kendrick stiffened. He had seen the file the night before. It was clean. But the judge's tone changed instantly. This court doesn't tolerate reckless behavior disguised as activism, Drayton said, not even letting Darius's attorney speak first. You chose to violate public order. There are consequences. Objection, Your Honor, the defense attorney said, rising. That is prejudicial language. Drayton raised his gavel. Overruled. I will not be lectured on how to run this court. And that's when Kendrick stood. He didn't speak. Not yet. He just stepped forward from the gallery, badge clipped at his waist, voice unreadable. The courtroom paused. Drayton froze. Mr. Robinson, the judge said, masking unease behind formality, you're not on this case. Kendrick nodded. That's correct, Your Honor. I'm not representing Darius Caldwell. I'm here as an observer. A citizen. A witness. And as I've told the press, your presence does not entitle you to. I'm also here, Kendrick cut in, on behalf of the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. We have officially opened a file on this courtroom. Gasps erupted. Cameras snapped. Drayton's jaw clenched, his knuckles white against the gavel's handle. We've compiled data from over 300 municipal cases, Kendrick said clearly, addressing the court now. And Darius Caldwell's hearing today perfectly reflects the pattern we've documented. A pattern of disproportionate sentencing, biased language, and systemic imbalance. This is outrageous, the judge barked. This is a courtroom, not a press conference. You're right, Kendrick replied calmly. It is a courtroom. So let's act like it. He turned toward the jury box, now empty but symbolic. Let the record show, justice does not shift with public opinion. It is not reserved for those in suits. And it is not silence in the face of inequality. Drayton rose from the bench suddenly, voice shaking. You think you can walk in here, wave your badge, and dismantle my reputation? Kendrick's voice never wavered. I didn't dismantle anything, Your Honor. You did that, one ruling at a time. The judge stared at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time in Kendrick's memory, Drayton didn't respond. He sat. The bailiff whispered something in his ear. Drayton looked at the papers before him. Case dismissed, he said quietly. Mr. Caldwell is free to go. The room didn't cheer. It breathed. Like someone had opened a window in a house long shut tight. Outside the courtroom, Darius walked up to Kendrick. His voice was soft, trembling. I didn't do anything wrong. Kendrick nodded. I know. They said I was a criminal, Darius said. Kendrick looked him in the eyes. They've said that about a lot of us. What matters is, now they have to prove it. As Kendrick walked toward the courthouse steps, Danielle met him halfway, holding up her phone. "DOJ just called," she said. "They want you to speak at the Civil Rights Summit in D.C. next month. And CNN is calling what happened today a turning point in judicial oversight." Kendrick looked at the building behind him. Still tall. Still cold. But for the first time, not untouchable. "Tell them I'll be there," he said. "But first, I have one more stop to make."